The program you're about to hear is Emotional Maturity. This is part of a series of discussions with Richard Kinninger entitled On Becoming an Initiate.
The conditions and circumstances into which you were born were designed by you to present the challenges that would most fully activate your mental powers and advance your egoic growth. By means of the many linkages you have with others during your lifetime, you develop and fine-hone your intellectual and emotional skills and hopefully proceed through the natural process of growing up. Life is dynamic and beckons you toward full psychological maturity. Unless you are the proverbial clod, the world acts as a great teacher which tries you and serves to overcome individual weakness. When you set yourself upon the path toward initiation, your life becomes a continual learning process, directly assisted by higher teachers. Your efforts to uplift your thoughts, attitudes, and behavior are strengthened through knowledge acquired from your experiences. If the circumstances in your lifetime are largely conducive to developing a healthy character and emotional stability, you will eventually arrive at the status of psychological maturity, and this provides the base essential to your effective exploration of spiritual realms. The characteristics of the mentally healthy person are: he is able to earn his own livelihood, work without too much complaining, and he keeps too busy to be unhappy. He is not overly attached to his parents or to the past. He does not act impulsively, but rather he has learned to control his emotions, to exercise good judgment, and to make rational decisions. He utilizes the experiences of past mistakes to acquire wisdom in a positive way. He accepts the hardships which befall him in a philosophical way and does not allow himself to become cynical or to hold neurotic prejudices. He is able to get along with almost everyone, is flexible in his associations with others, and is humanly understanding. He tries to keep his nose out of other people's affairs and not interfere in their lives. He is tolerant, tactful, and not argumentative. He can accept criticism, is not overly sensitive, and has a sense of humor. He is glad to be alive, and he radiates his joy and self-confidence. He has achieved a desirable lifestyle which makes his life pleasant. He has learned how to relax and enjoy recreation and the pleasures of life. He is capable of giving love and sharing love with someone. He has faith in mankind and has a healthy attitude toward people and the world around him. The well-adjusted man and woman are likable persons. They never dominate others, although they are dynamic and self-assured. They are free of neurotic indecision and follow through positively in their actions. They are poised and broad-minded. There is no selfish motive in their dealings with others. They give love rather than expecting it. They are kind, considerate, and romantic. They are even-tempered and discuss rather than argue controversial issues. They achieve mutually satisfying sexual adjustments with their mate and can appreciate the viewpoint of the other gender. They are not goody-goody and are just daring enough to be fascinating. They can enjoy an off-color joke, but their tendencies towards adventure are never foolhardy and are always under control. They never compete with their spouse but seek companionship. Excessive complaining, fussing, bickering, teasing, and nagging are recognized by them as fatal to a marriage. No one is spared the sorrows of life, but it is how one reacts which determines if one is normal or neurotic. The healthy-minded person does not allow himself to become incapacitated by depression. He keeps from becoming either over-elated or greatly depressed by employing constructive rationalization to avoid extremes. If he has a spell of the blues, he knows the mood will disappear as time goes by, instead of surrendering to depression. The emotionally healthy person does not allow his worries and fears to make him over-anxious. He tries to distinguish between unfounded and real worries, and then he deals intelligently to solve those which are within his control. Well-adjusted persons exercise moderation in everything they do: eating, drinking, working, playing. They keep in close contact with the things which stimulate and inspire them, such as beautiful music, art, literature, love, and religion. They cultivate sound living habits and constantly strive to develop techniques of self-improvement to attain healthier thinking and peace of mind. They refuse to be defeated by setbacks, and they work for the betterment of their future. Emotional maturity involves the ability to stick to a job, to struggle through until it is finished. Maturity gives rise to one's capacity to give more than is asked or required in a given situation. It is this quality which enables others to count on one. It is reliability. Persistence and forbearance are aspects of maturity with which one endures frustration, discomfort, hardship, and unpleasantness. Determination to succeed gives one a will to live and to cooperate with others, to work in an organization under authority. The mature person exemplifies the 12 great virtues alloyed with the wisdom to adapt and compromise flexibly if necessary in the face of inimical outside pressures. Dissatisfaction with the status quo calls forth assertive, constructive effort from the mature person to satisfy his social concern and devotion. The mature person readily sustains his own morale. In the general sense, an emotionally mature person has formed a set of attitudes which allows him to form many positive linkages with other people so that he may maximize the learning potential of his experiences. To do this, a mature person has become self-reliant, creative, capable of cooperating with others, a producer and contributor more than a consumer, and capable of lending his support and energies to a useful undertaking. While physical maturity occurs quite naturally, psychological maturity is something which we must learn. None of us is born with the characteristics of the mature person. Our maturing process literally fills all of the space between birth and death, and all of us exhibit, at one time or another, some form of immaturity. Unfortunately, our present society places little, if any, real value on producing emotionally mature individuals. Instead, the barrage of advertising propaganda with which we are inundated has promoted a youth-glorifying and responsibility-avoiding culture, a sad departure from the ideals and values which made America great. Let's briefly review the maturation process. At birth, you are totally unable to meet any of your needs, emotional or physical. You depend upon your parents for food, affection, and sensory stimulation. Your parents are your only contact or link with the world. Without them, you, as an infant, would perish. You are born ignorant, irresponsible, inarticulate, and in need of cuddling and love. You are at first totally self-centered. Gradually, with the properly stimulating experiences, you develop the neurological connections and motor skills which enable you to function independently. You can then begin to fulfill, at least in part, some of your basic needs and begin to develop a sense of self or individuality. The process of establishing linkages with other people gives rise to your acquisition of knowledge, responsibility towards others, empathy as to their needs, the means of communication, and getting your strokes physically and emotionally. If these linkages are not formed, you remain socially, mentally, and emotionally immature. Indeed, your very sanity is maintained by links with other people. But if those other people should be unsane, you would also grow up unsane. Through childhood and young adulthood, you find yourself increasingly in contact and interrelation with other human beings. You operate in a social environment which presents opportunities for learning social skills which will better enable you to function cooperatively with others. As an adult, you find that the meeting of your emotional and physical needs depends upon your adeptness in dealing with others so that your associations are fair and mutually beneficial and therefore likely to continue. A mature person is able to meet his needs in a manner which is neither manipulative nor exploitive. As you mature, you feel less need to try to manipulate people. You become more your own person, and you do not find it necessary to impose yourself upon or seek one-upmanship over your spouse or anyone else. You do not have to bully anyone to prove yourself. The person who is quite complete within himself does not feel the need to draw from another individual. That means that an egoically advanced person is less dependent upon others, and he tends not to cling to his spouse or anyone else. As you learn to love people more and more, you learn to allow them to be free. You do not try to own them and isolate them in an effort to have a guaranteed source of comfort and gratification, nor do you try to prevent other people from loving him or her. Jealousy and possessiveness are due to lack of real love. The adept's ability to love literally the whole world is almost perfect. You can eventually love everyone, even those who spitefully use you, and even those who might want to take your life. You truly love them, and so you do not fear them. The higher you advance, the less dependent you are upon others, yet you can love them more, and the contacts you do have with them are more intensely gratifying. Love is strange in that the more one gives, the more one has of it. One of the characteristics of the advancing individual is his ability to give love and ask for almost nothing in return. He is so enriched by the giving of love that he does not need a demonstration of love from other people. He becomes more complete unto himself, but that does not mean that he becomes indwelling. To the contrary, he becomes more involved with others and serves the causes of mankind enjoyably. At this point, he has grown successfully from his egocentric view at infancy to a sociocentric maturity wherein his interests center around the welfare of others. He has self-confidence and self-esteem based on his real accomplishments. He is not hungry for support or approbation from other people. He knows what is right, and he does what is right. If he does not do something quite right, he answers first to himself rather than to his critics. The brothers are the ones whom he seeks to satisfy, not the largely erroneous opinions of the world. Many great individuals appeared to have flown in the face of their society, and yet wound up being the great philosophers and pace-setters of their day, whom the world finally recognized as bearers of truth and goodness. An emotionally mature person has learned to form appropriate responses to his whole environment. He is able to deal effectively with life circumstances, and, as a result, he is able to distill the maximum benefit from each experience. He is optimally alive and growing. The mature person seeks to learn more and more throughout his adult life. There is no diminishing of enthusiasm to know and to be aware of the marvelous realm of human experience and our fascinating universe. Sometimes you may respond to your social environment in an irrational and ultimately inappropriate way. Such a response is often one you discovered worked for you as a child, and you have since reinforced it repeatedly. The neurological networks which these habitual responses travel become well ingrained until they are so automatic you may not even be aware of them. Everyone has been traumatized, embarrassed, or guilted by events large and small in his formative years. As a result of the accompanying emotional pain, your psychological growth in a given area can be arrested at that point. These can become unresolved emotional fixations which tend to lock you into your attitudes at the time of the traumatizing event. Until you discover and thus release these blockages to your growth, some of your responses remain immature. You may deal with your hang-up as an adult or try to bypass the problem, but the underlying cause remains a fixation upon a past event, which is kept from your conscious awareness by protective psychological processes. Psychological growth occurs in stages. In order to arrive at balanced maturity, each stage should be properly developed before you progress into the next. If your development was arrested at certain points in the past, then part of you is not living as an adult. Self-analysis helps to surface these blockages so that you can understand them, not as a child would, but rather in the light of your adult understanding. As a child, you learn that certain types of actions brought success, while others seemed to fail. You learn perhaps that certain types of manipulative behavior brought you the results you desired. Since this type of behavior may be widely prevalent, you might never learn that it was and is inappropriate and immature. It is in our Western heritage and in Christian doctrine that one's soul, as represented by the mind, is considered the essence of man, but our tradition regards the mind as bound during a lifetime into a base and corrupting body. Emotions have been associated in our Apollonian traditions with carnal pleasure and reckless, undisciplined behavior. Emotions presumably are the enemy of Christians, who should subdue them by strength of will until they are mastered, expunged, and obliterated. It is true that emotions should be brought under your guidance lest you find yourself blown helplessly before the winds of your own feelings and desires. However, emotions are part of your mind's armamentarium to eventually elevate your ego to the higher realms of spiritual development. The finest feelings of compassion, love, and joy are Christian goals, but somehow even these feelings are subtly subordinated in the West to the intellect which presumably derives the same ends through justice, self-denial, and adherence to duty. Unquestionably, all these are positive and desirable aspects of your personality and character, but something has been lost in the subordination of human feelings to the rigid constraints of the intellect. We in this part of the world have come to the point of denying to one another that we have feelings and seem ashamed to exhibit emotions. Emotions are what give us depth and aliveness, for otherwise we are like two-dimensional placards playing stiff role relationships, boss to employee, customer to salesperson, parent to child. We are there performing our functions, but not really relating to one another. Emotions have their value, and you should come to terms with them. Most of us are afraid to plumb the depths of our feelings and let them run their course. It is as though we feel that strong emotions have unlimited depths in which we would be lost if ever we were to let go and experience them fully. But, of course, they do have a limit which is within our ability to handle. It is natural to experience grief at the death of a friend. Keeping a stiff upper lip and feigning composure for outsiders becomes dehumanizing if you do not sometime release it, experience it, flow with it, and thus resolve it. Even anger and fear have their life-preserving functions. To refuse to acknowledge these feelings because you feel they are unworthy is to bottle them up for later uncontrollable emotional explosions or to become the source of unconscious, self-destructive psychosomatic illness. Anger and fear are the responses to situations with which you have not yet learned to effectively cope. Recognizing and facing the existence of a negative emotion is the first step and opportunity to eliminate the personal shortcomings which give rise to frustration and anxiety. Therein lies an effective path to egoic evolution and control of self and your environment. Your reluctance to report honestly to others your emotional responses to their statements and actions relative to you keeps you play-acting and shallow in your relationships with them. You then respond in indirect ways through game-playing and try to communicate in meta-language instead of plain, forthright exchanges. The widespread attitude that irritations must not be stated or revealed lest they lead to unpleasant confrontations has the long-term effect of developing tensions and distancing people from one another, whereas to report directly and fully your response to actions and situations puts the interpersonal exchange on a level where both parties can deal with it effectively. Facts are far better to cope with than any number of myths, suppositions, and false denials. The exchanges between parents and child are disastrous when parents cover up their true responses to the child's assertions within the family. It is essential to the child's emotional growth that he always receive a clear message from his parents how they feel about what he says and does. That way he does not have to guess or be afraid. A child communicates on an intuitive, inside level, and he relies on that form of perception more than language. If the parent is saying everything is all right, but the child is perceiving feelings of tension and anger, he is confused and frightened. The child concludes that the parent is really conveying that feelings are too dangerous to express. If this double message is common in a family, outward serenity coupled with inward tension, then the child begins to feel he cannot trust the parents and that they are not reliable for him. The whole issue of the meaning of verbal communications can be viewed as lies and cover-ups by the child, and he too will copy emotional dishonesty. A parent has a right to be irritated, be angry, feel sad, ask to be left alone because of a bad day, cry, and in general express the feelings within himself openly. The child can then get the message that feelings are valuable and acceptable when the parents say and do what they really feel and give congruent reports of their emotional state rather than expressing what they think is right or perfect. That gives the child permission and encouragement to own and express his own feelings. When the child enters his teen years, it is important that he had this kind of preparation of being comfortable with emotional expression so he can explore his feelings and pursue in depth his imagination of the joys and tragedies of life and taste these moods fully. Without this essential growth process, the child will grow into a frozen, seemingly unfeeling adult. A child learns to modify his behavior towards others in the world by observing the real effect his actions have and whether he suffers rebuke or gains acceptance because of them. In this way he can freely experiment with making better connections with other people, as well as express what is inside of himself. This kind of emotional honesty allows him to be himself and be faithful to his unique internal rhythms and personality. Many people have learned from their parents to deny their real selves and to refuse to acknowledge or explore their true emotional makeup. Proper balance between the intellectual and emotional aspects of mind enhances life and brings you into open, honest, directed control of your feelings. Hidden, suppressed emotions can be permanently damaging to your proper psychological functioning and can produce explosive, aggressive behavior. Stunted and twisted emotions prevent a person from perceiving reality clearly, and they modify, interfere with, and even block the recording of information in the brain's memory. Disordered emotions would tend to subconsciously fight your practice of the great virtues. Your body provides everyday tools for exploring the universe internally and externally, and in conjunction with your mind, you have all the equipment to attain egoic advancement. To promote intellectual aspects of mind at the expense of emotions is to cripple an otherwise integrated system designed by our creators to lead you smoothly to ultimate truth and fulfillment. But lest I give the impression that poor technique in rearing children by parents is the primary cause of neurosis and widespread emotional immaturity, I should hasten to point out that they, in their turn, were also victims of our patriarchal Western culture. Parents dutifully pass along the philosophy, rules, and so-called ideals of their culture, even if the tenets of that culture produce guilting and prevent development of self-esteem. Our authoritarian civilization strives to imbue each member with obedience to the will of those in power. True individuality is discouraged at every turn. Compliance with subtly concealed religious and political despotism and dedication to nationalism is promoted as a worthy goal for everyone. A person is conditioned through self-doubt and guilt to look to himself as the source of his failures and shortcomings, rather than correctly identifying the old order political, economic scheme of things in which he is immersed as the real source of his inability to successfully and happily meet his basic emotional and physical needs. Our current civilization encourages us to strive to attain mythological sources of gratification rooted in materialism. When after years of struggle a person may acquire all the trappings of the American dream, he finds but a hollow victory that cannot gratify his spirit or even provide a sense of having gained maturity. If a person does approach real psychological maturity in his egoic evolution, he finds himself in painful conflict with the juvenile character of our civilization. One must remain juvenile in order to accommodate to the shallow and false goals of American consumerism and glamour sex. The truly mature person drops out of sight, and if he is lucky, allies himself with others of his kind in a group that promotes maturing and a sane awareness of truth. Emotional health and sound character growth are founded upon the individual's capacity to love. This in turn depends upon good self-esteem, but our society generates emotion-quashing guilt and unworthiness primarily through its unnatural outlook on human sexuality. The Brotherhoods have not forgotten that the greatest of all civilizations was possible because men then knew incontrovertibly that psychic health also depends upon orgastic potency, that is, upon the degree to which a person can surrender to and deeply experience the climax of excitation in the natural sex act. Admittedly, this is an essentially Dionysian ability found only in the peaceful matriarchal cultures. In our culture, the overwhelming majority of people suffer orgastic impotence, even though most men can achieve ejaculation, which is merely a mechanical attribute of the body. Orgasm is a profoundly pleasant, whole-body experience quite beyond the basic release of sexual tension during coital climax. Americans are largely unable to feel orgasm because of their muscular armorings, which hold chronic tensions, and also because of cultural anxiety about feeling pleasure that prevents psychic surrender to their body's sexual rhythms. These are clinically proven relationships attested to by hundreds of practicing psychiatrists. People who are brought up with this negative attitude toward life and sex acquire a pleasure anxiety which is anchored in unremitting muscular spasms that drain away much physical and psychic energy for their whole adult lifetime. This neurotic pleasure anxiety is basically life-negating and is at the core of one's fear of an independent, freedom-oriented way of life. This fear causes people to seek authorities upon whom to be dependent and to do their decision-making for them, and leads to willingly subordinating themselves to domination by strongmen. The character structure of Western man is typified by armoring against his inner nature and human feelings. This character armoring is the source of his isolation from other people, dissimulation of his creative energy, craving for authority over him, fear of responsibility, sexual misery, neurotic destructiveness, aggressive hatefulness, and yet a strange tolerance of pathological conditions in his society. Western man has disastrously alienated himself from and has grown hostile toward life. This alienation is of a socio-economic origin rooted in patriarchal materialism and authoritarianism. The natural satisfactions of work have been replaced by the compulsive duty of the work ethic. Natural, self-regulating sexual activity has been superseded by compulsory morality. Antisocial activity and insanity arises out of our cultural suppression of natural life. The distorted structure of Western civilization gives rise to the pathological need of populations to give obedience to dictatorships, and these dictatorships justify themselves by pointing to the irresponsibility and childishness of the masses. All these powerful and overwhelming social forces inhibit psychological maturity. The need for social acceptance causes all too many persons to adapt to the prevailing juvenile social structure. But to adjust perfectly to an insane and immature society is to be insane and immature yourself. Maturity, among other things, means being your own person and seeking ultimate reality so that you can make appropriate and sane responses to the events and situations in your life. Moreover, psychological and emotional maturity is a springboard to the most satisfying aspects of being a mature adult. Having finally learned how to maturely cope successfully with life and meet your basic emotional and physical needs allows you to experience the spiritual and higher psychological order of human needs. When you arrive at the point where your self-esteem is firmly established, the importance of saving face and maintaining prideful self-image fades, and the drive to control others and have worldly power becomes strangely unimportant. Another word for this is ego-transcendence, not egoic with a capital E, and it opens the door to a host of very satisfying new experiences and views of self in the world. The result of these is a deep sense of peace, happiness, and completeness. The most important of such new insights is a profound appreciation of and demand for truth and self-honesty. Pure and unadulterated reality becomes refreshingly supportive and provides the firm foundation for philosophic security and certitude. Time-honored myths, however beautiful and uplifting to the ascetic senses, become intolerable. Goodness, justice, and honesty are simply right, and the mature person supports them regardless of old personal prejudices. The beauties of the universe, ranging from the human form to mathematic precision, from artistry to the niceties of the creation, become thrilling contemplations and take on deep importance as one conceptualizes them and appreciates them. The fully mature person tends to view the world in integrated wholes, and the seeming inconsistencies and dichotomies begin to merge into harmonious, synergistic patterns. This seems to be due to one's own acceptance and resolution of opposites into unities, and the perception that antagonists are really balancing partners. Having maturely stepped aside from the need for personal power and one's resistance to opponents, allows one to see the larger view at last. The emotionally mature, ego-transcending person is characterized by his aliveness, enthusiasm, zestful functioning, and spontaneity. He is in no way helpless, but his drive now is to accomplish good rather than being self-aggrandizing. Being courageous enough to express one's uniqueness is another freeing attitude of maturity. There is much joy in being who you are instead of trying to put on a mask or live out some act which you thought would impress others. Seeing the need for perfection in the world and working for it in one's own life is the very opposite of the widespread hopelessness in the world. The mature person brings good workmanship and sound planning wherever he goes. He accepts the destiny of man as a great good, and he sees the effective avenues for the task of egoic perfecting set before him by his Creator. He hews directly and clearly to the core of matters with appreciation of the essential simplicity of life, and his days are enriched by the orderliness and lawful fairness of human existence. His growing playfulness in his newfound security encourages joy and a sense of humor. His erstwhile grim striving has given way to effortless, beautiful functioning and graceful ease in his life situations. There is no sense of lack in his life. The richness and fullness of human existence and nature abide within him. He has become autonomous and aware of his identity. He no longer places demands upon others for himself. He loves without needing to have love expressed to him. He does not need to own people or things. He simply cannot be manipulative for his own ends. The foregoing ways of viewing the world usually come as penetrating insights which are hard to verbalize or intellectualize. Many such insights manifest as flashes of realization which cannot be reduced to logical argument, and these views illuminate one's understanding in almost mystical ways. Indeed, these enlarging and beautiful perceptions, which are so new and different to a person, are in many ways precursors to the possibility of his achieving mystic awareness. Yet such increased scope of perception appears to arise quite naturally when true ego transcendence occurs. All these advantages of emotional maturity are denied the great majority of adults because the social structure discourages maturity in the populace. It is important that the world have as many emotionally mature men and women as possible in order to reestablish sanity and proper values. As you make a conscious effort to set yourself on a path leading in the direction of human perfection, a certain amount of emotional turmoil results. This turmoil can be distressing and difficult to surmount, but it is important to remember that other people have faced the same problems and have ridden them through to a happy conclusion. Most likely you have observed someone who made a change in his life and eventually mastered the feelings of insecurity and confusion that always seems to follow personal change. By knowing that others have succeeded, you have both inspiration and incentive to make changes for your betterment. A person of 45 or 50 years who seems to have the world at his fingertips because he has financial success and the knowledge necessary to make things happen probably wandered around in self-doubt when he was 20 and wondered if he was ever going to get out of a rut. When one experiences turmoil and doubt, it is wise to consider that answers were found by others in similar situations, so obviously the means to improve exist. Everyone who ever brought order to his life had to do so by finding the solutions to his problems. Acquiring emotional maturity corresponds to finding a way to satisfy your desires and ambitions without causing harm or pain to other people. Not knowing how to cope with life situations produces frustration and the feeling of being overpowered by the whims of chance. Changing your views and attitudes in order to adjust from what you imagine life to be to what it really is produces the same emotional situation as adolescence. Every time a change is achieved by growth of one aspect of your attitudes or personality, all the other aspects of the personality must be adjusted to balance to the change. Some people will do almost anything to avoid the mental and emotional upheaval associated with major growth and change. They will avoid new ideas because the adopting of new ideas demands the effort of reevaluation and resultant realignment of the personality. New facts which threaten to overthrow a philosophy they have grown comfortable with will be rejected rather than sanely adopted to. On the other hand, the person who seeks to grow in order to enjoy the rewards of mature control has learned that the difficulties of taking on a perpetual adolescence are more than offset by the expansiveness afforded by growth. There is the added benefit of habitual resilience of mind and outlook which accompanies a willingness to endure the turmoil of personality readjustment in order to attain growth and find truth. A tried and true technique for starting on the road to successful change and diminishing the anxiety of self-doubt is to gradually build your confidence. Bit by bit you gain confidence simply by trying one small thing and being successful at it, then trying another small thing and again succeeding. With each success, regardless how minor, you can say that something has been accomplished, that a change in your life has taken place. Thus confidence and the self-esteem founded on success become established. Because control of yourself and your environment do not come easy, you must have a good deal of persistence. You cannot let failure stand in your way. Remember, one of the laws of the universe is that your environment will gradually conform to your strong desire. Often it will take you 20 years to undo that which you have become over the prior 20 years in order to become the person you desire to be. If you keep knocking yourself because you are not progressing fast enough, then you hold yourself back by carrying a sense of defeat. Be what you are. You are still an optimum person if you are growing as fast as you are presently able. Try to be a little better each day by setting goals that are within easy reach, and this will give you confidence and lead to ultimate great success. We become what we practice, and there is no habit that cannot be consciously superseded by a better one. What images a person holds of himself will eventually manifest into outward reality. Put no limits on yourself. The conscious application of the 12 great virtues allows you to override your old behavior by the simple process of rethinking your attitudes and practicing better ways until they are habitual. Then you can, by determinedly practicing each of the virtues in your daily life, overlay old responses with newer, more constructive ones. Most non-virtuous behavior is not due to emotional fixations, but rather to copying negative behavior from those around you or by being lazy and manipulative. Everything that happens to you is filtered through your image of self. Your environment reacts to and thus reflects and confirms your own inner reality. If you believe you are worthy of receiving love from others, then others can love you. Making healthy adjustments to life's sometimes pleasing and sometimes disappointing events is characteristic of the emotionally mature person. He lives his life effectively because he has shed his self-defeating modes of thought and behavior. When armed with attitudes that work and an understanding of human psychology, you too can move forward more effectively in your progress toward initiation in the Brotherhoods. I see we don't have much time left for questions, but if there are any, we can get some taken care of.
Does being proud correlate with emotional immaturity?
Well, there's nothing so fiercely prideful acting as a 9-year-old boy. I think pride is mostly based on a condition where you really don't have much going for you as yet, and so therefore you have to prop up some sense of self-importance by many kinds of posturings. In countries where machismo is the strongest, the men have been trying to cope with a general condition of poverty which has existed for centuries in their land. Almost all the countries around the Mediterranean Sea have suffered economic privation, which has kept their men from having anything that they could point to and say, "This is mine, this is my home, this is what I have accumulated." Noble families and a few rich individuals managed to control everything, and they could get anything they wanted because they had wealth and the power it brings. This is emasculating enough to the average guy who has nothing when he lives in a patriarchal society where status is measured by how much he owns. So the average man had to turn to having an exaggerated pride in his manhood, and anything that could possibly offend that pride he had to defend even to the death, because that claim to manhood was really all he could call his own.
Well, I agree that machismo in Italy and Mexico is very real, but that doesn't much apply in an affluent society like ours.
Nevertheless, our culture attacks a man's sense of masculine worthiness in ways which are just as debilitating, even though different. From the time that they are infants and all up through their whole lives, men are constantly being reminded that they are the destroyers in the race. They are the ones that go to war and kill innocents and ravage cities. They pollute the land and seas and destroy forests to make money, and they use and abuse women. One of the first things my grandmother taught me was that boys are made of snips and snails and puppy dog tails, and that disturbed me for a very long time, especially when compared to girls who are made of sugar and spice and everything nice. That rhyme has to have a tremendous impact on just about every little boy who has heard it. But that is just one small pebble in a whole avalanche of attitude-forming things which convey over a lifetime that men are insufferable destroyers, while women are billed as the creators and nurturers of life. What this has resulted in is a massive guilting of one half of the human race. There's nothing basically or inherently in males to justify the myth that they are killers by nature or non-nurturant, but since everyone believes that it's so, it can't help but undermine all male-female relationships. It is our culture that promotes the importance for boys to demonstrate that they are tough. I remember that I obtained most of my scars as a youngster, proving that I was just as brave as the rest of the kids. And I didn't even want to do the things I did. Who wants to climb electric power poles and mix it up with the high power lines? But one had to. If you didn't take a dare, you were chicken, and a useless sissy among your peers. Many a Puerto Rican man has received scars or been killed because it was easier to go through a knife fight than to be literally ostracized by his peers for sensibly backing down from a confrontation. He might just as well leave town. Even though Americans don't have duels of honor much anymore, there are plenty of other similar pressures throughout the Western civilization. Little boys can't cry because a little soldier mustn't break down even though the doctor is sewing up a gap in your leg that takes 10 stitches. The kid won't cry because he'll lose face with the nurse. What eventually happens is that men feel so guilty about having natural emotions that they end up cutting themselves off from feeling anything at all. Boys have to try to make themselves as insensitive as possible to all of the things that little girls are permitted to experience, to be comforted, to be cuddled, to seek and accept emotional support. Why do we expect boys to grow up to be non-human in this respect? A man in our culture thinks he will lose face if he turns to anybody for assistance. He may suffer from lung cancer and heart disease, yet he avoids going to a doctor because that would be an admission that he is not in full control of himself. He has come to believe from societal attitudes that to depend on some other person makes one a weakling, a woman. Insanity. Well, I see that time is up. Thank you.
You've been listening to Emotional Maturity. This is part of a series of discussions with Richard Kinninger entitled On Becoming an Initiate.